It used to scare me in a weird way, but now doesn't and scares me in a different way. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of this. This came up, honestly, something Jonathan was talking about a few weeks ago to me. Kind of hit me as like, you know what? It's something that's not understood very well. Go to Revelation. We'll start in 13. Okay, the first thing that kind of surprised me in the book of Revelation was kind of understanding that it's interpreted different than a lot of the other books in the Bible, because I learned this thing about at that time they had what's called apocalyptic literature, apocalyptic language, and they would take common themes, historical events even, and then write it in dream language. You ever had a dream and then the next morning you wake up and you can look at the different aspects of your dream and kind of line it up to what's really happening in your life, connect the two? You know what I'm talking about? So this monster in this dream that I'm having right here wasn't a literal monster, but it was my boss yelling at me, and they were saying pretty much the same thing or something like that. You get what I'm saying? Okay. Dream language. Well, apocalyptic literature is written in that metaphorical, like dream language. Okay. And so I knew that there were books at that time that you could read, and passages of books and kind of see what it meant. I know there's a really famous book of Esther that was written in apocalyptic language, and it was all about dragons. And you read it, you're like, what in the world is this talking about? This is scary. This is something you'd see on Lord of the Rings. And then you get over here, and there's a key, and it says, okay, this is the book of Esther. Oh, that's Esther. That's Mordecai. That's Xerxes. And you can start pointing out all the different parts in the book. You get what I'm saying? That makes sense? Okay. Well, once I understood that, it kind of took a little bit of that fear, first off, of, monsters and locusts and all sorts of stuff coming after me. And I was like, okay, well, what does this mean? And what does it mean to these people? You get that? One of the biggest things I was scared with as a child, talking about me like missing the rapture if I got the mark of the beast. You hear that aspect before? And people were talking about, I remember when I was little, it was like social security numbers to new chips that you could get planted. And if you get a chip in you and you can just, buy off vending machines, that's the mark of the beast. And if you get this little chip, there's no way you're going to heaven, right? This kind of idea. That's kind of scary for a kid to hear, isn't it? And it's like, well, what is that? I don't want that. Correct? And it comes from Revelation 13. Talk about this beast that comes from the earth, and this beast that comes from the sea in chapter 13. But just for time's sake, because I'm running out of time, look at verse 15. Start in verse 15. It says, and it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and causes many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand and on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man. And what's that number? You guys know this. 666. Okay, so as a child, hearing this, and hearing preachers talk about it and hearing it everywhere, I was like, what's the 666? Don't like that number. Anytime you see it, it's bad luck, right? That's kind of the idea. You don't want a number 13 and you don't want 666. Bad luck. And I remember thinking, so what am I going to get on me that could have 3 6s or something? And who is this man? Is this one world order? And all this kind of stuff that I was very, very scared of, honestly. Okay, so stop right there. Now let's go to chapter 14, verse 1. It says, then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written, where? On their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as firstfruits to God and to the Lamb, and no lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless. Okay, well, reading this, I want to be in this group. I want to be following the Lamb. I want to be good with God, right? I want to be righteous. I don't want to be defiled with fornication, the old King James will say there, or any of those different aspects. Okay, so that's good. So why am I running away from a number 666 and not looking for this name that I'm supposed to put on my forehead? What's going on here? Why did we switch from chapter 13 to chapter 14? Well, it's because it's ripped out of context. Okay, if you're going to be looking for truth, you're going to be looking for what it's saying, what the original author says, don't be cherry picking verses and passages, because that's really easy to become subjective. This is what this means to me. And then you can add your thoughts and put your verses together and come up with your ideas, right? Well, let's read it in its original context. And in its original context, you don't want something on your head and on your forearm, right? Okay, but you do want something on your head. So something no, something yes. Okay, so what would they have known about this? Did they have Social Security cards in Asia Minor? Okay, did they have chips, computer chips at that time? Did they even keep pets that could have had chips in them? That was a big one. I remember that. This is a step towards the Antichrist. You ever heard that? Okay, did they have any of those things? No, they did not. What did they have? Exactly. They had their culture, and what was the book that everybody knew in their culture? The Torah, right? Right. The what we would consider the Old Testament for the most part. Most people had in the churches. What holy books were they using to study? The Law and the Prophets. They had the Old Testament. Every once in a while, they would get a letter or so that they would consider very, very valuable, that they would read and try to understand the Old Testament with. New Testament didn't get put together and brought into churches until later. So these early churches here, after Jesus, are reading their Old Testament. Okay, if you had Jewish descent, which was the norm at that time, you had Jewish folk who used to be going to the temple, making sacrifices. Now they turn towards Jesus, and we don't need the Day of Atonement anymore. Okay, what did they have? They understood. Their school was the Old Testament. Okay, in particular, their school being the Old Testament, 3 days a week, if you were a good Jew, you know what verse you quoted. Do you know what passage? Here's an interesting one. A passage that the scribes and the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees actually had in little tiny boxes on their head. And they would wear these little boxes on their head and have this little passage in there. Sometimes have their passage on this little tiny thing on their wrist. Anybody know what that was? The Shema, which comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. And what does Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 say? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, and the Lord is one. Keep reading that section. What's that whole passage about? It's about make sure that you teach the law to your children, right? Make sure that you're talking about it when you're walking, when you're stopping. Make sure that you have it on the gates of your house, and you need to wear it as though it were frontals to your forehead, right? And on your right hand. Okay. And as rightly said, what was understood symbolically about that, they took it very literally when they started putting it on their heads. But understood symbolically about it, and what Moses was saying is, hey, guess what? This law of God that I've written, it's more than just this ceremony thing. This is what your life is made up of. When you think with God's law. Right? When you act with God's law. Right. when I go to this time here in Revelation, and I look at this group of people, when they're saying, don't take the mark, right, of this beast, of this ungodly thing, it says, don't think the way of this beast. Don't act the way of this beast. But you have something on your forehead, right? And what's on your forehead? God's law, Christ. The New Testament. They sing a new song because they have a new covenant, a new way of thinking. You get that? Okay. And this beast that comes out of the sea, and sea always represented Gentiles. And the beast that comes from the land, and what's the promised land? Right? These beasts that are coming after him, it made a whole lot more sense when I said, oh, wait a minute. The biggest enemies in the early church were the non-believing Jews and the non-believing Gentiles that were read by Rome in particular. And what's really interesting is in some of the old manuscripts, the number is not 666. It's 616. You know that? And so now do I have two unlucky numbers that I'm looking at, 666 and 616? Well, the more I studied it, the more I saw it, and I was like, wait a minute, why are these 616 and these are 666? Because they used Roman numerals back then, but they used Greek and Hebrew with their Roman numerals. Because you know what a Roman numeral is, right? What language are Roman numerals from? Latin. And an I, what we consider an I, represents a 1, a V, a 5, C, 100, an M, 1,000, right? Well, that's how they wrote their numbers also in Hebrew and Greek. And what's very interesting is the number 666, the number of a man, you can put as Caesar Nero in the Greek. And guess what that number is in Hebrew? 616. So what the warning was, and which made sense because who were the big bad guys against the church right now? Christians would not say Nero is Lord. They would say Jesus is Lord, Christ is Lord. And it caused issues. It did cause issues. And this is believed to be written close to the time right after when Nero burned down Rome and blamed the Christians for it. Okay, when you read through the book of Acts, who's the ones that are continuing to chase the Apostle Paul out of city to city to city? Always seems to be the bad guys. About 25% of it was Gentiles, and 75% was who? The non-believing Jews who were running them out. And the big bad guys in the early church that were putting to death Christians, right? And taking property from Christians, okay, throwing them in prison and jail, were these two groups, which were allowed with one another. It was allowed for you to be Jewish, but it was not allowed for you to be Christian. Both legal. And they were the ones that were persecuting Christians. So I was like, wait a minute, this makes a lot more sense that this beast from the land represents these non-believing Jews that are chasing them. The beast from the sea, who's bigger and greater, right? And giving credence to the beast of the land to do whatever the beast of the land is the non-believing Jews. You see that? And it got so bad that if you were found out to be a Christian, you couldn't even buy stuff in the marketplace. This was when Nero was stringing up Christians and lighting them on fire so he could walk from palace to palace. And the church was so small at this time. And imagine, who are the two biggest heroes in the Bible that you can think of besides Jesus? New Testament. Who are the two biggest heroes that are talked about? Paul and Peter. What happens to Paul and Peter under Caesar Nero? They both die. Imagine you're in that church then, when your leaders, your two big leaders, that did all these miracles, that are doing all this spreading, both get killed by this man. And he's coming for you. Would that be a scary time? Makes a little more sense when you're reading this book now, doesn't it? Makes a lot more sense. So, I'm not concerned about certain aspects that other people are when it comes to this book about my newspaper now. Okay. I'm not. But I am heavily concerned about making sure I'm living a godly, righteous, Christian life here in this world, knowing that there's a mark of the world and that there's a mark of God. And am I living godly now? Am I thinking godly now? Am I acting godly now? Or am I acting whatever worldly aspect I'm under the influence of right now? Am I doing whatever worldly aspect I'm under the influence of now? Right now, I would think this would be a lot more. How do you feel about the homosexual issue? Right? That's what we're dealing with more than lots of other aspects, interestingly. It's those kinds of things that come on. Are you thinking and dealing in the godly world, or are you thinking and dealing with the ungodly part of your world? And that made it a lot scarier, honestly, that book, because that made it real to me now, not what could be happening in 15, 20, 30 years. You get that? Okay. So, how did I get to that point, though? I had a lot of people challenge what I thought. I went to books that challenged what I thought. I went to teachings that challenged what I thought. Because certain things just didn't make sense to me. And I was like, that just doesn't make sense. Why? And the more and more I searched and the more I read people who didn't see it the same way I did, I think I got a better understanding of that book. You get that? Because I'm trying to look at it compared to what's real, what's outside, what they would have seen. Not my newspaper today. Okay, so does that make sense? So I'm just trying to give you an example of something that I really changed on just because I was opening myself up to trying to find out what the truth was. Okay, humble enough to say, well, maybe what I thought wasn't right. Maybe that's not the correct way to see it. And guess what? If I get more proof and more push that isn't correct and there's something else out there, I'm going to look at it because I'm trying to stay humble enough to understand that Dallas doesn't know it all. And when I love God with all my mind, I'm trying to humble myself and learn as God would want me to learn and put my effort into trying to get things correct and right. Amen? Does that kind of make sense? So when you have questions, guess what? I want you to ask them. When you have doubts, guess what? I want you to express them. Talk about it. Because that's where iron sharpens iron. And if you hit truth in the midst of a doubt and it makes sense, guess what's going to happen to that doubt? It's going to at least go down a lot. I don't know if it'll completely disappear, but at least say it'll dissipate a lot. Okay, but if you're not allowed to ask questions in the midst of your doubts, what do doubts do? Lots of times they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow. And if you let them grow long enough, who knows where you're going to end up? Okay? Okay, remember, who's the father of lies? Who's the father of deception? So I believe that if you have a spirit of you're not able to talk, you're not able to question, you're not able to doubt, I don't think that's a godly spirit. Is that fair? Yeah. Here's how I will say it. Like 2 more minutes, I'll be done. Okay, 2 more minutes. For example, when I teach an apologetics class at Ecclesia, and in the midst of that class, what I say is here's what God has done for me in my life, at least, as I'm punching this thing on my chest here. It's like I feel like lots of times I'm told to go do this, and I have enough understanding of who God was in the past that even if this in front of me doesn't make sense, that I can walk into that well knowing that I may not have an answer now, okay, but I've got enough of this in the back that it says that I can trust this and that I can walk through this. You get that? And that God can deal with my not understanding and my questions. And in a relationship, there's something sweet and there's something special in a relationship when you have to trust somebody even if you don't understand it completely. Isn't that something when it's like, this doesn't make sense? When I tell one of my children, It's like, I don't want to do this. It doesn't make sense. And I say, well, trust me. This is how it's supposed to be. You need to trust me on this. When they obey, isn't there something sweet about that? Compared to no, 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 right? Okay, well, if that's true for sinful Dallas, right, how much more true is that when we've had a God who proved himself over and over and over to us, and he says, hey, I want you to trust me with this right here. You don't know what's going on yet, but you just walk right through that, and I'll be there in the midst of it, and I've got a plan, and I'm going to take care of it. Doesn't that bring some sort of peace, some sort of connection with God when you can have that type of trust and that type of faith? So I don't want to lose that at all in this. I'm trying to understand truth. I'm trying to follow truth. I'm trying to follow God. You get that? But in the midst of that, sometimes you walk through kind of this dark area with a little tiny lamp in front of you as you take one step at a time. Sometimes you get to look back and go, oh, okay, I get it now. Doesn't always happen, though. Doesn't always happen. So it's just interesting, isn't it, how God tells us to trust. So it's a good balance, teaching in the midst of that, that I don't want to lose out for sure. So questions, comments? I know we usually don't do that on Sunday morning, but does that make sense? Going? Okay. All right. And I say that because I love you guys. And as we follow God together, we try to follow God together more fully. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to have doubts. It's not okay to not say anything and hold it back and not bring it up and not be honest about that. Does it make sense? Okay. All right. So I love you guys. And I know you love me. So we'll dismiss. We'll sing a verse real fast because we still have business meeting and I went a little long.